There's a reason why life looks glamorous in the movies, and it's all about this: frames per second. In movies, we have 24 frames per second. Now on TV and YouTube, like this video, you have 30 frames per second. And when we talk about sports and games or real life, it's 60 frames per second. So one way that you can test this is if you notice the way people walk. You'll notice that in movies, it's a little bit slower. It's a little bit more, effortless. Now TV and YouTube, it's kind of just what you're used to seeing on when you watch something. Now when we get to sports and especially games, it feels almost like the real life. You want the sports to look real, and actually sports are got a higher frame rate just so that they can slow it down, so they might, be doing 120, so that way they can give you that slow motion replay. But normally you see it in 60 frames per second. Now, why is this important? It's important because we need to learn that what happens in the movies, or even YouTubers. There's some YouTubers that now use 24 frames per second. And if you're in the European continent, you will actually probably get 25 frames per second because I actually really don't know why, but you guys are always different, right? Now TV and YouTube, it's easy to just record in 30 frames per second. Your phone is probably geared towards 30 frames per second. Now you can change it in some of the iPhones to 24 frames per second, but that depends on the resolution. If you want to do 4K, 1080p, or 720p. It's important to understand that what we see in the movies are fake. We all know that the storylines are pretty much fake, but we can never understand why what we record on our phones is different than what we see when we read it back. Now, we do have this one thing with our head and our brain that when we see stuff on the horizon, whatever we see on the horizon is larger to us than if we take a photo of it. And that's just our adaptation, probably to see the danger that's coming ahead towards us. But it's one reason why you can't get the moon, that pretty moon, to look as good when you record on it. Now, if I really wanted to put the effort in it, I'd probably do the movie 24p, just because it makes it look more luxurious, in my opinion, makes it look high end, because you are no longer just a regular person. You are someone that is more of an idea, like you have this idea of this character and who or she might be. And when you're doing 60p, it's a lot bigger file. So 24p to 30p, not much of a jump there, right? But when you go from 30 to 60, that's twice as big. So you'll have this huge file, and your friends that are gamers might think you're cool, but another thing to look at is if you're gaming in 120p, is your monitor or TV, your laptop actually showing you that? Because it has its own limitations, and that's the refresh rate on it. So if your display can't do 60p, which it probably can, but if it can't do 120p, then you're not watching that in 120p, I'm sorry. They're just splitting it down to 60p for you. But if you want to actually look at this, take a moment and put in the YouTube search bar for 24p frames per second, 30p, 30 frames per second versus 60 frames per second. And there are some really good examples of people that have taken footage from like Sons of Anarchy, and they've managed to split it up so that you can see how different it is. And it's insane when you look at the 60p, because it feels like that person is right there with you. It's like real life, somebody walking. Now 30 frames per second just feels like a family video that you recorded from the 90s, right? And then 24 frames per second, that feels more like a mood. It just feels like a storyline and less of like real life. So I just wanted you guys to learn this. I'm surprised at how long it took me to learn this. I always knew that they use different colors in movies to set the mood. That's very obvious if you ever watch The Matrix. but I never knew that the actual camera itself recording in a slower way made things look different. It's not something that you would see with a naked eye until you know what you're looking for. So definitely give that a search. 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second versus 60 frames per second. And tell me the results that you get, because it's pretty intense.